stocks plunging at the open. Big question here is whether or not the sell-off is overblown or if this is the start of a market correction. We want to bring in Seema Shah, Principal Asset Management Chief Global Strategist. Seema, what do you think? How should investors be looking at this?
Hi. Well, look, I think the first thing to say is there's still so many question marks at the moment, a lot of questions that need to be answered before investors can really take an educated decision on how they want to deal with their exposures. Right now, I don't think that we're at that point when we can start talking about correction territory. But I think it has, given where valuations are, we came into 2025 with investors quite rightfully a little bit concerned that things were looking fairly frothy, particularly for those mega cap tech names. And this is a good reminder that, look, global diversification really is key. I think the macro environment at the moment is constructive, which means that there should anyway be a broadening out away from some of those mega cap tech names to other sectors. So it's important right now that investors be looking at what is a broad universe of opportunities, not just in those Mag 7.
For those who were sitting out there and sharpening their pencils for any buy on the dip opportunities, we were mentioning and discussing this earlier. This is that dip. They got their dip. Can they feel comfortable, though, buying? And given some of the question marks that you were raising a moment ago, what answers should they be looking to solidify?
Well, I think the first thing to say is that, there have been a lot of people waiting on the sidelines, waiting for some kind of pullback because they know that the environment is constructive. We still think that earnings growth from a broad level, but also for the tech firms, is going upwards, which is generally it's a good environment for equities to continue rising. But today's pullback, I think, given where the question marks are, it's probably not the time to be dipping straight back in. You want to see, is this company, what is happening with the costs? How much of news can we get in terms of where the Chinese government has maybe contributed? How sustainable is this? This isn't also the first time that there have been these kind of almost competition scares for some of those big cap, the mega magnificent 7 names in the past. And a lot of those competitions have suddenly withered away. So I think it's still really early days, but I think the thing that investors can hopefully sit back on and enjoy is that, look, if you do have exposure to other sectors such as financials, which benefit from not only having obviously limited exposure to this issue, but actually limited exposure to some of the other factors that are weighing on uncertainty for investors today, including trade tariffs, they can be quite positive that, look, the environment is still for strong growth and at least those names can continue to deliver positive returns.
Seema, just given the sheer size and scale of big tech, obviously we've been talking a lot about diversifications and broadening out of the markets, especially when it comes to earnings season. But a move like this that we're seeing this morning, it very much points to the fact that just how critical tech is here to this earnings season, the overall health that we're going to get just in terms of those growth rates, and then also just the overall trajectory and the narrative out there in the street right now, right?
I mean, I think it's true. And, I think everyone has become increasingly concerned about how concentrated the market is. And in some ways, you're right that, a lot of the trade has become very much one-sided. What we've seen last year is that, of course, there was always talk about a broadening out, but every time that maybe the mega caps took a bit of a sit back, they came straight back in again, which has continued to draw more and more investors in. As I said, look, the economic environment is still very constructive for earnings across most sectors. That's really key. The other thing to take back from this is that, look, if DeepSeek is everything that they're saying, this is ultimately positive for broad productivity around the world for all sectors. So, there is some good to be taken. Maybe it does put some question marks around those very key tech names, or his key tech name for the US. But it certainly isn't necessarily the end of the story of US exceptionalism and productivity.
As we're evaluating DeepSeek, and that is the of course, conundrum du jour, we also have to think about the Fed and what that decision is going to hold, of course, later on this week as we start to get inclination, or at least can believe in what the Fed is projecting for the rest of this year. What most notably would you be paying attention to in the language that the Fed is using, especially as the markets are weighing that in the balance?
Yeah, sure. And I think the first thing to say is that, we're dealing with uncertainty as investors, but the Fed itself is also dealing with a lot of uncertainty, specifically with regards to what are the inflation pressures that could emerge over the rest of 2025. I think investors be realistic that Powell is unlikely to offer any clear answers at this stage because they need to see what are the policies, what is the implementation, and then after that, what is going to be the impact specifically to inflation expectations and growth. These are all very big question marks. So I actually don't expect us to hear much. We could hear maybe some comments reiterating that rates are quite restrictive, which would give us an indication that at least the bias is still for lower interest rates. But I think the jury is still out. And what we're going to be watching for over the next few weeks is not just Fed speak, but really an extra emphasis on what are the inflation numbers going to be and what are the labor market data going to be. Those are the two things that actually I think are more important even than the news coming out today about DeepSeek.
Seema, appreciate the time just after the opening bell. Thank you.
Thanks.